Good evening, friends. Welcome back to another quiet corner of history, where we slow down, breathe deeply, and let the distant past wash over us like a gentle tide. Tonight, we're going to drift into something truly peculiar. Something that might make you smile in the darkness, the strangest, most bewildering pregnancy tests from medieval history. Before we begin, take a moment now. Dim your lights if you haven't already. Settle under your blanket, adjust your pillow just so, and let your body sink into the mattress beneath you. Feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders. Outside your window, the world continues. But here, in this space, we're stepping back through the centuries together. Tonight's journey will take us through castle chambers and monastery gardens, through the workshops of physicians and the quiet corners of village homes, where people faced the same question that echoes through all of human history: is there a baby on the way? But the methods they used were wonderfully, fascinatingly strange. And if this calm journey helps you unwind, if you find yourself drifting peacefully as we wander through these old stories together, tap like and subscribe only if it feels right. No pressure, no hurry. Just a gentle way to let me know these quiet history lessons are helping you rest. Where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? Let me know in the comments. I love imagining all of you, scattered across time zones, all finding this same pocket of peace. Now, let's begin. Close your eyes if you'd like. Breathe slowly. And let me tell you about a time when discovering pregnancy required nothing more than wheat, barley, and a very patient wait. Let me take you back, far back, beyond the medieval period, for just a moment. We first need to visit ancient Egypt, around 1350 BCE. Picture the Nile Delta, that ribbon of green cutting through endless sand, where the air smells of river water and sun-baked mud brick. In those days, there lived a woman, let's call her Merit, though her real name is lost to time, who suspected she might be carrying a child. She went to a physician, a learned man who kept papyrus scrolls filled with medical knowledge passed down through generations. He gave her 2 small linen bags, instructing her carefully. In one bag, she was to place barley seeds, in the other, wheat seeds. Then, each day, she was to moisten these bags with her own urine. Now, I know what you're thinking. Stay with me here. The physician told Merit to wait, to tend these bags as she might tend a small garden. If the barley sprouted first, she would have a boy. If the wheat sprouted first, a girl. And if neither sprouted at all, she was not pregnant. Imagine Merit in her home, the late afternoon sun slanting through a high window, checking these bags each day with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The smell of baking bread drifting from a neighbor's house, the distant sound of workers singing as they hauled stone for yet another temple, and these 2 little bags holding her future in their fibers. Here's the truly fascinating part, the detail that might make your mind tick over as you drift toward sleep. This method actually had some scientific validity. In the 1960s, yes, the 1960s, researchers decided to test this ancient Egyptian technique. They found that the urine of pregnant women did indeed promote seed germination more effectively than the urine of non-pregnant women. The elevated estrogen levels, it turned out, acted like a growth hormone for the seeds. Not reliable enough for modern standards, of course, but containing a kernel of truth nonetheless. the medieval physicians. Those learned men who studied in places like the medical school of Salerno in Italy, founded in the 9th century, knew about this Egyptian practice. They read about it in translated Arabic texts, which had preserved ancient Greek and Roman medical knowledge. And so, this grain testing method found its way into medieval medical manuscripts, copied by candlelight in monastery scriptoriums. The scratch of quill on parchment, the only sound besides the whisper of turning pages. Picture now a medieval physician's chamber, somewhere in France, perhaps in the year 1200. Stone walls hold the cool even in summer. Wooden beams cross the ceiling, dark with age and smoke from countless fires. On a table lies a leather-bound book, its pages illuminated with careful marginalia in red and gold ink. The physician lets call him Bernard reads by the light of 3 tallow candles, their flames steady in the still air. Bernard has been trained in the humoral theory of medicine, the belief that the body contains for humors blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black biland, that illness comes from their imbalance. Pregnancy, in this understanding, is a warming and moistening condition, a shift in the body's fundamental nature. It makes sense to him, then, that this changed state would manifest in changed properties of the body's fluids. When a young woman, perhaps a merchant's wife, her hands soft and her dress made of good wool dyed with expensive madder, Root comes to him with questions. Bernard remembers the grain test. He instructs her just as that ancient Egyptian physician instructed Merit millennia before. The same bags, the same seeds, the same daily ritual of checking and waiting. But medieval physicians didn't stop there. Oh no. They were creative, endlessly experimental, combining what they read in old texts with their own observations and theories. Bernard might also tell his patient to save her urine in a glass vessel for 3 days, covered with a cloth. If, after 3 days, small living creatures appeared in the urine, and here we're probably talking about natural microorganisms, this too might indicate pregnancy. Imagine the woman going home, carrying her bags of seeds, carrying her glass vessel, careful not to spill. Her maid helps her, both of them whispering about the possibilities. What will they name a child, boy or girl? The woman's husband, a merchant who trades in Flemish cloth, waits anxiously, running his hands through his beard, a gesture he makes when worried. Days pass. The household continues its rhythms. The cook makes pottage, that thick stew of whatever vegetables and grains are at hand, stirred slowly over the fire until it steams and bubbles. The smell fills the house, mingling with wood smoke and the dried lavender scattered among the floor rushes. Servants sweep and haul water from the well. The merchant leaves on a trading journey and returns. And all the while, those bags sit in a quiet corner, slowly, beginning to sprout. Let me tell you something else about these grain tests. Something that reveals how people thought about pregnancy in those days. The belief that barley meant a boy and wheat meant a girl wasn't just random. Barley was considered a hotter grain in humoral theory, associated with masculine properties. Wheat was cooler, feminine. The medieval mind loved these correspondences, these patterns that seemed to link everything in creation to everything else. The stars influenced the herbs influenced the humors influenced health. It was a universe of connections, a web of meaning that we've largely lost in our modern compartmentalized thinking. There's something almost soothing about that worldview, isn't there? As you lie there in the dark, feeling your own breath move in and out, think about a universe where everything connects, where nothing is isolated, where the grain in the ground and the child in the womb are part of the same great pattern. It's a thought that can quiet the mind, settle the racing thoughts that keep us from sleep in England. In the 13th century, we have records of this practice continuing. A manuscript from that period, written in Latin in a monastery somewhere in the English countryside, maybe Yorkshire, where the hills roll green even in winter and stone walls divide the fields into a patchwork, describes the grain test in careful detail. The monk who wrote it had probably never performed the test himself, bound by his vows to celibacy, to a life of prayer and study. But he copied the knowledge faithfully, knowing that others would need it, that the accumulated wisdom of the past must be preserved for the future. Can you picture that monk? His scriptorium is cold, even with a small brazier of coals glowing in the corner. His fingers, stained with ink, are stiff with chill. He wears several layers of rough wool robes, and still he shivers. But he continues, forming each letter with deliberate care, because this is his offering, his service. The scratch of the quill, the occasional pause to dip it in the inkwell, the rustle of the page turning, these sounds are his daily music. Outside the monastery, a village woman might be, at that very moment, checking her own bags of grain, hoping for sprouts, hoping for the child she and her husband have prayed for. She knows nothing of Latin manuscripts or humoral theory. She only knows that her mother used this method, and her grandmother, and that it's part of the wisdom passed down through generations of women, shared in whispers. In the spaces between official knowledge, this is where history gets textured, you see. It's not just kings and battles and dates. It's these quiet continuities, these practices that connect ancient Egypt to medieval France, to an English village, all through the simple act of moistening seeds and waiting, hoping, wondering. The grain test persisted for so long because it felt right. It involved patience, observation, and a kind of sympathetic magic-like calling to fertility, encouraging fertility. And in a world without reliable pregnancy tests, where women might not be certain until they felt the quickening, that first unmistakable movement of the child inside, any method that offered earlier knowledge was valuable, even precious, as the candles burn lower in our imagined medieval chamber. As the merchant's wife finally sees the first green shoots pushing through the dampened cloth, as she calls her maid to look, both of them exclaiming softly, joy and apprehension minglings, all this unfolds in your imagination. Let your own body relax more deeply. Feel the mattress beneath you. Notice how your breathing has slowed, deepened. You're safe here, warm here, drifting through these old stories like a boat on a calm river. The grain test was passed down in manuscripts and oral tradition for centuries, finally fading from practice only in the early modern period, as new methods and new understandings gradually displaced it. But for 1,000 years and more, it was part of the toolkit of physicians and midwives, part of the texture of women's lives, part of the quiet, intimate knowledge of the body that people carried with them. And so, as we leave that French physician's chamber, as the candles gutter and go out and night settles fully over the medieval town, we prepare to journey elsewhere, to discover other methods, other tests, each stranger than the last. But that's for the next chapter. For now, just breathe, just rest. Let the image of those sprouting seeds stay with you, a symbol of patience, of hope, of the slow unfolding of life. Now, let your mind wander forward a century or so, to the 1300s. We're going to visit a different kind of physician, one who relies not on seeds and patience, but on observation, on the art of looking carefully at what the body produced. This is the era of uroscopy, the examination of urine. It was considered one of the highest diagnostic arts of medieval medicine. Imagine a physician's consulting room in the Italian city of Bologna, famous for its university, its towers, its learned doctors. The year is 1320. The room is more comfortable than the French chamber we just left. There's a proper fireplace, not just a brazier, and the physician, Maestro Giovanni, has done well for himself. His robes are trimmed with fur. On his desk sit several glass vessels, each shaped like an elongated flask with a rounded bottom, designed specifically for examining urine. These are called matullas, and they're one of the most recognizable symbols of medieval medicine. A patient arrives a noblewoman, judging by her fine silk veil and the gold embroidery on her sleeves. She's accompanied by a maid who carries, very carefully, a matulla filled with the lady's urine, covered with a cloth to protect it from the sun and air during the journey through Bologna's streets. Maestro Giovanni receives them with formal courtesy, gesturing them to sit while he takes the matulla to his examination table, positioned near the window where the light is best. And now the performance begins, because uroscopy was, in many ways, a performance, a demonstration of learned expertise that awed patients and justified substantial fees. The physician holds the matulla up to the light, turning it slowly, observing the color, the clarity, the consistency. He looks for sediment, for cloudiness, for any unusual hues or textures. In his mind, he's running through a complex system of interpretation, one that took years of study to master. Medieval medical texts described literally dozens of different urine colors, each with its own name and diagnostic significance. There was pale urine and golden urine, red urine and black urine, urine the color of lead or horn or white wine. For pregnancy specifically, physicians looked for certain telltale signs. One medieval text, written in the 1200s by a physician named Trotula, or possibly written about women's medicine and attributed to a female practitioner. The historical record is murky, describes the urine of pregnant women as having a clear, pale, citron color, with a cloudy substance floating in it, like fine wool or cotton dot. Can you picture it? The maestro holding that flask up to the afternoon light slanting through his window, watching how the liquid catches the sun, observing the tiny particles suspended within. He's completely focused, his expression serious, almost reverent. This is his art, his science, the skill that sets him apart from common healers. But let me tell you about something even stranger that some medieval physicians claimed to see. They believed that if you examined the urine of a pregnant woman very carefully, holding the matulla just so in the light, you could see not just that she was pregnant, but whether the child would be a boy or a girl. Some texts claimed that urine from a woman carrying a boy would show red or dark particles on the right side of the vessel, while urine from a woman carrying a girl would show white or pale particles on the left side. Right and left, you see. That medieval love of correspondence, again. The right side was associated with heat, masculinity, and activity. The left with cold, femininity, passivity. Even the womb itself was thought to be divided, with boys developing on the right side and girls on the left. This belief persisted for centuries, passed down through medical texts, taught in universities, accepted as fact by learned men. Now, here's where it gets beautifully, absurdly specific. Some physicians didn't just look at the urine itself. They performed tests with it. One method involved taking a sample of the woman's urine and mixing it with wine, then observing what happened. If the mixture remained clear, she was pregnant. If it became cloudy or separated, she was not. The theory behind this had to do with the relative heat of pregnancy supposedly stabilizing the mixture, preventing curdling. Imagine our noblewoman watching as Maestro Giovanni pours a small amount of wine into a separate vessel, then adds her urine drop by drop, swirling gently. The wine is red, probably from the vineyards in the hills surrounding Bologna, where the soil is rich and the autumn sun ripens the grapes to perfection. It mingles with the pale urine, creating swirls of color like a sunset reflected in water. They wait. The lady fidgets with her rings, turning them around and around on her fingers. Her maid stands perfectly still, trained to silence and invisibility. Outside, the sounds of the city drift up, a cart rumbling over cobblestones, someone calling from a window, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. The mixture remains clear. Maestro Giovanni nods slowly, a small smile appearing on his face. He turns to the noblewoman and confirms what she already suspected. Yes, she is with child. The lady's face transforms, joy and relief washing over her features. She clasps her hands together, perhaps murmurs a prayer of thanks. This child, if it's a boy, could be her husband's heir. If it's a girl, a valuable political pawn in the marriage alliances that structure noble life. Either way, she has fulfilled her primary duty. She is not barren. Let me tell you about another urine test, one so strange it almost defies belief. Some medieval physicians, particularly in the Germanic regions, claimed they could test for pregnancy by placing a woman's urine-soaked cloth on lettuce leaves or other greens and observing whether the plants wilted or thrived. The logic, such as it was, ran something like this. Pregnancy warms the body's fluids, and this warmth would be transmitted to the plants, affecting their growth. It's sympathetic magic, dressed up in medical language. But people believed it, practiced it, swore by it. There's something hypnotic about these tests, isn't there? The slow mixing of liquids, the careful observation, the waiting to see what will happen. They require meditative attention, a willingness to slow down and watch closely. In our modern world of instant results and digital readout, there's something almost enviable about that slowness. That space for contemplation built into the diagnostic process. Of course, uroscopy wasn't limited to pregnancy testing. Medieval physicians claimed they could diagnose virtually any ailment by examining urine. Fevers, digestive problems, kidney stones, heart conditions supposedly revealed themselves in the color and consistency of this daily bodily fluid. There were charts, elaborate diagrams showing flasks filled with different colored liquids, each labeled with diseases and conditions. These charts appeared in manuscripts throughout Europe, copied and recopied. Variations on a theme. The most elaborate charts showed a human figure surrounded by multiple lines connecting different body parts to different flasks, suggesting that urine from the same person could show different colors depending on which part of the body was affected. It was an impressive system, internally consistent, beautifully logical, and almost entirely wrong, of course, at least by our modern understanding. But that doesn't make it any less fascinating as a window into how people thought, how they tried to make sense of the body's mysteries. Picture a young physician, perhaps in Paris in the 1350s, studying these charts by candlelight in his small room near the university. He's memorizing the colors, the meanings, preparing for the day when he'll make his own diagnoses. Outside, the city is quieting down for the night. The watch calls the hour. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, and this young man, barely more than a boy, squints at his manuscript, running his finger along the lines, whispering the correspondences to himself. Pale as white wine, with a slight cloudiness heat in the liver. Golden and clear, good balance of humor. Dark red with sediment excessive blood. Recommend bloodletting. The practice of uroscopy reached such heights of prestige that some physicians became famous for it, traveling from town to town, their reputation preceding them. A truly skilled uroscopist could command high fees, and patients would bring their urine samples from miles around, hoping for a diagnosis, a cure, or in the case of an uncertain pregnancy, confirmation of their hopes. But here's a detail that brings it all into sharp focus. Physicians were warned in their training texts not to rely solely on uroscopy. The more honest medical writers acknowledged that examining urine was just one tool among many, that it should be combined with questioning the patient, feeling the pulse, observing the complexion and the eyes. Some texts even cautioned against charlatans who claimed to diagnose everything from a single glance at a flask, who put on a good show but lacked real understanding. There's a famous story, probably apocryphal, but telling nonetheless, about a physician who was challenged by skeptics. They sent him a flask of donkey urine, claiming it was from a patient, and asked for a diagnosis. The physician examined it carefully and announced, "This patient is in grave danger. They are transforming into an animal." When the joke was revealed, he supposedly defended himself by claiming he had known all along and was merely testing their integrity. Whether or not the story is true, it reveals that even in medieval times, there were doubts, questions, a recognition that perhaps not everything physicians claimed to see in a flask of urine was really there. And yet, for pregnancy testing, uroscopy persisted because there was no better alternative. The early signs of pregnancy were subtle, easily confused with other conditions. Missed periods could have many causes. Morning sickness wasn't universal until the quickening, that moment when the mother first felt the child move, usually around the 4th or 5th month. There was considerable uncertainty. Any test that promised earlier knowledge, even if its accuracy was questionable, filled a real need. Our noblewoman in Bologna, leaving Maestro Giovanni's consulting room with her confirmation, walks home through streets now purple with evening. Her maid follows 2 steps behind, the empty matula tucked carefully into her basket. The lady's hand drifts to her belly as if she might feel something already, though she knows it's far too soon. But the knowledge itself is enough. She is pregnant. She will have a child. And the physician, with his learned examination of her urine, has told her so. As night falls over medieval Bologna, as candles are lit in windows and families gather for evening prayers and simple suppers, our noblewoman begins the long months of waiting that lie ahead. But she has her answer now, gleaned from a flask of urine, a beam of sunlight, and centuries of accumulated medical tradition. Let that image fade now. Let the light dim. And as we prepare to move on to even stranger tests, let your own body sink deeper into rest. Your breathing is slow and even. Your thoughts are drifting, loose and gentle. There's no hurry, no pressure. We have all the time we need to wander through these curious corners of history. And you have all the time you need to drift toward sleep. Settle in a little deeper now. Let me tell you about one of the most peculiar pregnancy tests in the medieval repertoire. One that involved no bodily fluids at all, but rather an object most people kept close at hand, a key. It's a quiet morning somewhere in rural England. Let's say the year 1400. We're in a small village, maybe 24 houses, a stone church, fields stretching out in strips where different families work their allocated portions of land. The village is waking up. Smoke rises from roof holes as fires are rekindled for breakfast. Chickens peck in the dirt. A cow lows, waiting to be milked in one of the better houses, not grand, but solid, with a thatched roof in good repair and a separate room for sleeping. A young woman named Alice sits with her mother and the village wise woman, old Margaret. Alice thinks she might be pregnant. It's been 2 months since her last monthly bleeding, and she's felt queasy in the mornings, though that could be from any number of causes. Old Margaret, who has delivered babies and treated illnesses for 40 years, who learned her craft from her mother and grandmother before her, nods thoughtfully. "We'll try the key test," she says, her voice rough from age but firm with certainty. The key test. Let me tell you how this worked, because it's both simpler and stranger than you might imagine. The wise woman would take a key, often specifically requested to be the key to the church door, or sometimes the key to the family's own strongbox, and place it in a mug or bowl. Then the woman in question would urinate into the container, covering the key completely. The container would be left undisturbed for a period of time, usually 3 to 4 hours, sometimes overnight. After the waiting period, the key was removed and examined carefully. If the outline of the key had left an impression or mark on the bottom of the vessel, the woman was pregnant. If there was no mark, no impression, she was not. Now, I can see you smiling in the darkness. It seems absurd, doesn't it? What possible connection could there be between pregnancy and a key leaving a mark in a bowl? But remember, this is a world deeply invested in symbols, in correspondences. A key is an unlocking mechanism. Pregnancy is an opening, a passage about to be created. The womb is locked, and the baby is what will eventually unlock it, emerge from it. The key becomes a stand-in for this process, a way of asking the body's fluids a symbolic question. In Alice's house, her mother brings the iron key that locks their wooden chest, the one where they keep their few valuables, some silver pennies, Alice's marriage contract, a piece of fine linen saved for special occasions. It's a sturdy key, worn smooth by years of use, warm from hanging at her mother's belt, Old Margaret takes the key and drops it into a clay bowl. Alice's best bowl, glazed on the inside, with a pleasant green color that catches the morning light. Then, with the matter-of-factness that comes from a lifetime of dealing with bodily realities, Margaret instructs Alice to provide what's needed. Privacy is assured. The men of the household have gone out to the fields already, as they do every day, their day measured by the sun and the work to be done. The bowl is covered with a cloth and placed in the coolest corner of the house, away from the fire, away from sunlight. And now the waiting begins. Alice tries to go about her morning tasks. There's bread to knead, vegetables to tend in the small garden plot, mending to do, but her mind keeps circling back to that bowl. That key, the answer it might provide. Her mother, kneading dough with the steady rhythm of long practice, flour dusting her forearms, watches her daughter with concern and hope mingling in her expression. A grandchild would be a blessing, help in the house, eventually, security for old age, the continuation of the family line. But pregnancy is dangerous too. Every woman knows women who died in childbed, who left grieving husbands and motherless children. It's a joy, shadowed always by risk. Old Margaret, meanwhile, sits by the fire. She feels the cold in her bones these days, even on mild mornings, and tells stories of other tests she's done, other babies she's delivered. Her voice is a murmur, soothing, mixing with the crackle of the fire and the rhythmic thump of kneading. There was the miller's wife, 15 years back, swore she wasn't pregnant, swore it up and down, but the key test said different, and sure enough, 7 months later, the stories blur together, forming a tapestry of births and lives. The great continuity of existence in this small village. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher. A neighbor stops by to borrow a measure of salt, stays to chat about whose sheep got into whose wheat field. The mundane texture of village life continues. But underneath, Alice is counting the hours, waiting for the moment when old Margaret will nod and say, "It's time," finally. As the sun begins its afternoon descent, Margaret rises from her spot by the fire, Alice's hands still in her mending. Her mother wipes flour from her hands. The three women gather around the cloth-covered bowl, and there's a moment of suspension, of held breath, before Margaret lifts the cloth and removes the key, holding it up to let the liquid drip off, then examining the bottom of the bowl in the light. I won't tell you what she sees, not yet. Let's linger in this moment a bit longer, in this space of nothing, because it's a space women have occupied for all of human history, across all cultures, waiting to know whether they're carrying new life. The key test appeared in various forms throughout medieval Europe. Some versions specified that the key must be made of iron, the metal associated with strength and blood. Others insisted on a brass key, brass being an alloy with its own set of symbolic properties. Some versions had the woman hold the key in her hand while urinating, then place it in the bowl afterward. Others involved hanging the key on a string above the bowl, letting it dip into the liquid. There were regional variations, too. In some parts of Germany, a lock and key would both be used, creating a more elaborate symbolic system. In parts of Italy, the key would be blessed by a priest first, adding a layer of divine sanction to the proceedings. Every region, every village, almost, had its own specific way of doing things. Small variations passed down through generations of healers and mothers and grandmothers. What's fascinating is that this test persisted well beyond the medieval period. Records of the key test appear in folk practice into the 17th and even 18th centuries in some rural areas. Long after more modern understandings of pregnancy and conception were circulating in cities and universities, old ways die hard, especially when they're embedded in the intimate knowledge shared among women, passed down outside official channels of learning. Imagine these chains of transmission. A grandmother teaching her daughter. Who teaches her daughter? Who teaches hers? Across centuries, across upheavals and changes in the wider world. The Black Death comes and goes, killing a third of Europe's population. But the key test persists. The 100 Years' War rages, but women still gather in quiet houses to perform this ritual. The printing press is invented, revolutionizing knowledge and learning. But in villages throughout Europe, old Margaret's counterparts still nod sagely over bowls and keys. There's something deeply human in this, something that tugs at the heart, the desire to know, the need for certainty in an uncertain world, the hoping and fearing that comes with the possibility of new life. These are constants, unchanging, even as everything else changes. Let me take you to another time and place. It's the 1480s now, and we're in a small town in the Netherlands. One of those prosperous trading towns where the burghers are wealthy from wool and cloth, where the houses have glass in their windows and tiles on the floors. A merchant's wife, worried that she might be pregnant for the 8th time, mate children already. And she's not yet 35, consults with a woman known for her healing skills. This healer is more educated than old Margaret. She can read, a rarity for women of her class. She owns a small book, a medical manuscript copied from older sources, purchased from a student who needed money. In this book, among recipes for poultices and descriptions of herbs, is a description of the key test, written in a mixture of Latin and the local vernacular. The healer reads the instructions aloud to the merchant's wife, even though both of them already know the procedure. There's comfort in the ritual of it, in following the steps exactly as they're written. The key they use is the heavy iron key to the merchant's warehouse, a key that represents his livelihood, the source of the family's comfort and status. They perform the test in the midday stillness, when the merchant is at the town hall conducting business and the children are with their nurse. The house is quiet, expensive tapestries on the walls, muffling sound, winter light streaming through those precious glass windows. The bowl they use is fine ceramic, imported from Italy, painted with intricate blue patterns. The waiting here is different from Alice's waiting in her village house. The merchant's wife doesn't need bread, she has servants for that. She sits with her embroidery, creating elaborate designs on linen that will become altar cloths for the town church, a devotional offering. Her needle moves in and out, the rhythm meditative. She's praying silently, not for a child, she has more than enough children, but for no child, for her body to be her own for a while longer. When the time comes to check the key, when the healer carefully removes it, and both women examine the bowl, the result will shape the next year of this woman's life. But right now, in the waiting, there's a strange peace. The not knowing is its own space, a a space where contradictory hopes can coexist without resolution. This is what these old pregnancy tests really were, I think. Not just diagnostic tools, but rituals, structures that gave shape to anxiety and hope, that transformed the private wondering of individual women into something shared, something communal. The wise woman or healer who performed the test became a witness, a companion in uncertainty. The procedure itself, with its specific steps and its required waiting time, imposed a kind of order on the chaos of not knowing. And there's something soothing in that, even now, even for us. As you lie there in the dark, think about how often in life we're stuck in spaces of uncertainty, waiting to know, hoping for one outcome and fearing another. These old tests remind us that people have always felt this way, that anxiety and hope are universal human experiences, that we're not alone in our waiting. The key test eventually faded from practice as medical understanding of pregnancy advanced. By the 19th century, doctors had developed tests based on more direct physical examinations, though even these were far from perfect. The modern pregnancy test, detecting specific hormones in urine, didn't arrive until the 20th century. But for centuries, the key test was one of the tools women used, one of the ways they sought answers. Back in Alice's house, old Margaret has made her pronouncement. Alice's face, but no, I'll leave that to your imagination. Let you drift with the image of those three women, the morning light, the ordinary miracle of trying to detect new life in its earliest stages. Let the specifics blur as sleep approaches, as your own breathing deepens and slows. The key rests on the table, drying. Outside, the village continues its ancient rhythms, and somewhere in the great stream of time, we drift onward toward more stories, more strange methods, more glimpses into how people lived and hoped and feared. Rest now, breathe. Let the images wash over you gently, like a tide. As you settle deeper into comfort, into that space between waking and sleeping, let me tell you about another method medieval physicians used, one that required no urine, no seeds, no keys, only the touch of fingers on skin, and the ability to feel the subtle rhythms of the body. We're going to talk about pulse diagnosis, the art of feeling the blood moving through the arteries and dividing from its rhythm and quality what was happening inside the body. This was sophisticated medicine, prestigious medicine, the kind practiced by physicians trained at universities who had read Galen and Hippocrates, who understood themselves to be the inheritors of ancient wisdom. Picture the University of Montpellier in southern France, one of the great medieval medical schools founded in the 12th century. The year is 1340. Stone lecture halls echo with Latin disputations. Young men from all over Europe have come here to learn medicine, to transform themselves from apprentices into physicians, licensed practitioners who can charge proper fees and claim expertise. Among them is a student named Robert from England. He's been here 3 years now, and he's in his final year of study. Today's lecture is on pulse diagnosis, delivered by one of the senior masters, a gray-bearded man who studied in Salerno and served as physician to a cardinal before coming to Montpellier to teach. The master speaks in Latin, his voice carrying through the hall. The pulse, he says, is the voice of the heart, the messenger of the vital spirit. Learn to read it, and you can diagnose any condition predict any outcome. A skilled physician can tell from the pulse alone whether a woman is pregnant and how far along, and whether the child will be born healthy. Robert, sitting on a hard wooden bench with several other students, leans forward. This is what he's here to learn. This kind of expertise that will set him apart. That will justify the years of study and the money his family has spent on his education. The master continues, explaining the theory. There are, he tells them, many different kinds of pulse. Fast pulse and slow pulse, strong pulse and weak pulse, regular pulse and irregular pulse. The pulse can be felt at various points on the body, the wrist, the neck, even the temple, and each location can reveal different information. For pregnancy specifically, the theory went something like this. The pulse of a pregnant woman would be fuller, faster, more leaping in quality, because the body was working harder, heating up, producing the blood needed to nourish the growing child. Some texts claimed that the pulse on the right wrist would be stronger if the woman was carrying a boy. The pulse on the left stronger for a girl. That old left-right correspondence again. That medieval love of symmetry and symbolic meaning. But here's where it gets really interesting, where we move from theory to practice. The master instructs the students to pair up and practice on each other, feeling each other's pulses, learning to distinguish the subtle variations. The hall fills with the sound of rustling clothing as students shift positions, with murmured conversations as they compare what they're feeling. Robert takes the wrist of his partner, a French student named Guillaume. The skin is warm, slightly damp. Robert can feel the beat immediately, clear and regular, but learning to interpret what he's feeling, learning to put it into the categories and descriptions he's learned, that's harder. Is it fast or moderate? Strong or moderate? How would he describe its quality in the technical language required? They practice for an hour, switching positions, the master walking among them, correcting technique, offering observations. No, not with your thumb. The thumb has its own pulse. You'll confuse the two. Use your first 3 fingers, like this, gentle but firm. Yes, that's better. Now, what do you feel? Imagine the concentration in that hall. 24 young men utterly focused on the feeling beneath their fingertips, trying to learn this subtle art. The afternoon light slants through high windows, illuminating dust motes. Outside, the sounds of the city drift by the volume of noise, but inside, there's an almost meditative intensity. Now, let's jump forward, past Robert's graduation, past the years when he establishes his practice in England. It's 1355 now, and Robert is a successful physician in the city of York. He's built a good reputation. He attends wealthy patients, sometimes travels to their country estates. When summoned, he's prosperous, respected, a member of the city's elite. A noblewoman has sent for him. She lives in a manor house just outside York, surrounded by fields and forest. Robert rides out on a mild spring morning, his servant following with his bags of instruments and medicines. The trees are just leafing out, that fresh, bright green that only happens once a year. Birds sing. The road is muddy from recent rains, but not impassable at the manor. He's shown into a pleasant chamber where the lady waits. She's perhaps 25, dressed richly, her hair covered by an elaborate headdress. She's worried, he can see. She's been married 3 years and has not yet conceived. Her husband is patient, but his family is less so. There are whispers about barrenness, about whether perhaps the marriage should be annulled. A younger woman found, but now, she tells Robert, she thinks perhaps she might be pregnant. Her monthly bleeding is late, and she's felt strange, though she can't quite describe how. She needs to know, needs certainty, because so much depends on it, her security, her position, her worth in her husband's eyes and her own. Robert nods gravely. He's heard variations on this story many times. He asks questions first about her health, her diet, her habits, then requests permission to examine her pulse. She extends her wrist, and he places his fingers against the inside of it, just where the hand meets the arm, where the artery is closest to the surface. The room is quiet. Somewhere in the house, servants are moving about, but distantly. A fire crackles in the hearth. Late morning sun illuminates the expensive glass in the windows, casting colored patterns on the floor from the pane's subtle imperfections. Robert closes his eyes, focusing entirely on what he can feel. The pulse is there, steady, clear. He counts the beats, estimates the rate. It seems perhaps a bit faster than usual, though it's hard to be sure without knowing what her pulse is usually like. He moves his fingers slightly, feeling for the quality, the texture of the pulse wave. Is it leaping? That's the word the old texts use for pregnant women, leaping, like a jumping animal. He switches to her other wrist, feeling the pulse there, comparing. Is one side stronger? He thinks maybe yes. Maybe the right side is slightly fuller, but it's subtle. Easy to imagine he's feeling what he expects to feel, rather than what's actually there. This is the secret physicians rarely admitted. Pulse diagnosis was as much art as science, as much intuition and performance as actual observation. A skilled physician combined what he could feel with what the patient told him, with his observation of her complexion and eyes, with his knowledge of how likely pregnancy was given her circumstances. The pulse was one clue among many, not a definitive test, but the patient doesn't know that. She watches Robert's face anxiously, trying to read his expression. He's learned to keep his face neutral during examinations, to reveal his conclusions only when he's ready. It's part of the performance, part of what she's paying for. After several long minutes, Robert opens his eyes and releases her wrist. He nods, allowing himself a small smile. "My lady," he says, "I believe you are indeed with child. Your pulse has the qualities I would expect. It is somewhat faster than usual, and there is a fullness to it, particularly on the right side, which suggests to me a healthy pregnancy, possibly of a male child." The relief on her face is profound, transformative. She clutches her hands together, murmurs a prayer of thanks. Whether Robert's diagnosis is correct, and he believes it is, based on everything she's told him and shown him, she now has the confirmation she needed. She can tell her husband, can secure her position, can look forward to a future that had seemed uncertain moments before. Robert prescribes some gentle treatments to help ensure a healthy pregnancy, certain dietary recommendations, herbs that are thought to strengthen the womb, advice about rest and exercise. She listens intently, committing it all to memory. When he leaves, riding back to York with his bag of silver coins heavier, he feels satisfied with his work. He has used his training, his knowledge, his skill to provide a service that mattered deeply to this woman. Was his diagnosis based on real differences in her pulse? Differences caused by early pregnancy? Possibly. The pulse rate does increase during pregnancy as the heart works harder to supply blood to the growing fetus. But detecting that in the first few months, before the change is dramatic, would require extraordinary sensitivity and skill. More likely, Robert was skilled at reading people, at combining subtle physical signs with contextual clues, at making educated guesses and presenting them as certain knowledge. This doesn't make him a charlatan. Exactly. He believed in his methods. He had been taught them by respected masters. And sometimes, surely, he was right. The practice of pulse diagnosis for pregnancy persisted for centuries. Chinese medicine had its own elaborate tradition of pulse diagnosis, different from the European tradition, but equally detailed and sophisticated. In both traditions, practitioners claimed to be able to diagnose pregnancy from the pulse alone, and both traditions had devoted students who spent years learning to make increasingly fine distinctions. Think about what this means across different cultures, separated by thousands of miles and by very different medical theories. People independently developed the idea that pregnancy could be detected through the pulse. There's something real they're responding to, even if their theories about why it works are very different from our modern understanding. The body does change with pregnancy. Blood volume increases. The heart works harder. Hormones shift. These changes are subtle at first, but they're real. As you lie there, drifting, think about your own pulse. If you wanted, you could find it now, pressing fingers against your wrist or your neck. That steady beat, that rhythm that continues whether you think about it or not. That started before you were born and will continue until you die. Medieval physicians saw the pulse as the voice of the vital spirit, the animating force that distinguished living bodies from corpses. We understand the mechanics differently now, but the pulse remains profound, mysterious in its constancy. Robert, riding back to York that spring day, felt the rhythm of his horse's gait beneath him, a different kind of pulse, a different kind of living rhythm. The road wound through greening fields. Peasants were working, preparing for planting. Life continues its cycles, as it always had, as it always would. In the manor house, the noble woman placed her hand on her belly, feeling nothing yet, but knowing or believing she knew that life was beginning there. And in a monastery somewhere, a monk was copying out another medical text describing pulse diagnosis, preserving the knowledge for future generations, adding another link to the great chain of transmission that stretched from ancient Greece to medieval Europe to the future beyond imagining. Let that image dissolve now, blur into the gathering dark behind your eyelids. The pulse continues, yours and mine and everyone's, the great rhythm that connects us all, that measures out our time. Rest in that rhythm. Let it carry you deeper into sleep, into peace, into the quiet space where dreams begin. Deeper now. Let your breathing slow even more. Feel how heavy your body has become, how comfortable, how relaxed. We're going to wander into a garden now, a medieval herb garden, where medicine grew in neat rows and the air was thick with scents sharp, sweet, bitter, green dot. It's a summer afternoon in the 1420s, somewhere in the south of England, behind a small manor house, protected by a woven fence to keep out rabbits and deer, lies a garden tended by the lady of the house. Not a noblewoman, but a gentlewoman, the wife of a knight who owns several manors and farms. She has some education, unusual for a woman of her time. She can read English, though not Latin. She owns a small book, a herbal, describing plants and their uses. Her name is Eleanor, and she's in her garden now, checking on her plants. The garden is organized according to use. One section for kitchen herbs, another for medicinal plants, a third for strewing herbs that will be scattered on the floors to freshen the air. She moves between rows with the familiarity of long practice, noting which plants need watering, which are ready for harvest, which are struggling in one corner, carefully tended. Are the plants used specifically for women's concerns, pregnancy, childbirth, monthly bleeding, the diseases of the womb? Mugwort and pennyroyal, rue and tansy, yarrow and lady's mantle. Eleanor knows these plants intimately, knows when to harvest them, how to prepare them, which are strong and which are gentle. Women came to her for advice, especially women from the village nearby. The manor lord's wife, as healer and advisor to peasant women, was a common pattern in medieval society, a relationship that mixed genuine care with social obligation. Eleanor took it seriously. She had been taught a chain of knowledge stretching back generations. One of the things Eleanor knew, one of the secrets whispered among women, was how certain herbs could reveal pregnancy. Not cause it, not prevent it, but reveal it. Bring out the truth that the body was keeping hidden. Let me tell you about one specific practice, one that appeared in various forms throughout medieval Europe. It involved the herb known as lily of the valley, those delicate, white, bell-shaped flowers that grow in shady spots and smell sweetly of spring, according to folk belief. If a woman who might be pregnant made a tea from lily of the valley leaves and drank it, her response would reveal the truth. If she vomited immediately, she was pregnant. If she felt no ill effects, she was not. Now, here's the thing about lily of the valley. It's toxic, not deadly in small amounts usually, but definitely capable of causing nausea and vomiting. So, in a sense, this test was just deliberately making the woman sick and then observing her reaction. But there was a belief, whether it had any basis in reality, is questionable, that pregnant women were more sensitive to the plant's effects, that their altered state would make them react more strongly. Imagine a young village woman, married a year, coming to Eleanor's garden on a July morning. The woman, let's call her Marjorie, thinks she might be pregnant, but isn't sure. She's heard about the lily test from her mother, and she's come to ask Eleanor for help. Eleanor walks with her to the shady corner where the lily of valley grows. Those neat clumps of broad leaves and delicate flowers. She picks several leaves carefully, explaining as she does so. This is a strong plant, she says. You must use only a little, and you must be prepared for how it may make you feel. The knowing comes at a price. They go inside to Eleanor's still room, a small chamber devoted to preparing medicines and preservatives. It smells of dried herbs and vinegar, of honey and beeswax. Bundles of plants hang from the rafters, drying in the warm air. On shelves sit ceramic jars, labeled in Eleanor's careful hand, rose petals, chamomile, feverfew, 100 others. Eleanor prepares the tea with practiced hands, using only a few of the lily leaves, crushing them in a mortar, and then pouring hot water over them. The liquid turns faintly green. She strains it into a small cup and hands it to Marjorie, who looks at it with apprehension. Drink slowly, Eleanor advises. And tell me how you feel. Marjorie drinks. The tea is bitter, vegetal. She makes a face, but gets it down. Then they wait, sitting together in the still room, the summer afternoon quiet around them. Through the window, they can see the garden, bees moving from flower to flower. The whole scene drowsy with heat. After several minutes, Marjorie's face changes. She looks green herself suddenly. She stands quickly, and Eleanor guides her to a basin just in time. Marjorie vomits, her body rejecting the toxic tea. And when she's finished, wiping her mouth with a cloth Eleanor provides, there's a strange mixture of misery and joy on her face. "You're with child," Eleanor says softly, and Marjorie nods, laughing a little even as tears run down her face. This is a harsh way to find out, isn't it? Deliberately poisoning yourself, even mildly, seems cruel. But in a world with no reliable tests, in a world where pregnancy was both desperately desired by many women and fraught with danger, people were willing to endure discomfort for certainty. Not all herbal pregnancy tests involved making the woman sick. Some were gentler, based on observation of how the woman's body reacted to certain substances. There was a belief, recorded in several medieval texts, that a pregnant woman could not tolerate the smell of certain strong herbs. If you held pennyroyal or rue under her nose, and she recoiled or felt nauseated, she was pregnant. If she was unbothered, she was not. This actually connects to the phenomenon we now call morning sickness and increased scent sensitivity in early pregnancy. Many pregnant women do develop heightened sensitivity to smells, and certain strong odors that wouldn't normally bother them can trigger nausea. So there's a grain of truth here, wrapped up in folk belief and passed down through oral tradition. Think about Eleanor's garden again, that carefully tended space behind the manor house. It represented something important: women's knowledge, women's power. The herbs that grew there, the knowledge of how to use them, the skill in preparation and dosing. All of this was primarily in women's hands, passed from mother to daughter, from wise woman to apprentice. Men, especially educated men, physicians trained at universities, often dismissed this knowledge as superstition, as old wives' tales, and some of it was certainly less effective than claimed, based on incorrect theories, sometimes actively harmful. But some of it worked, at least sometimes, and all of it represented a way for women to have some control over their own bodies, some agency in matters of fertility and reproduction. Let me take you to a different garden now, a bigger one, more formal. We're at a monastery in Germany, the year 1150. This is much earlier than Eleanor's time. Back in the high Middle Ages, when monasteries were centers of learning and preservation of knowledge, this particular monastery is famous for its infirmary and its gardens. The infirmarian, the monk responsible for treating the sick, has created elaborate gardens with hundreds of different medicinal plants. He has access to texts from the classical world to the works of Dioscorides, and he's combined this book, learning with practical observation. Among his plants are several that medieval medicine associated with pregnancy and childbirth. Fenugreek, believed to help with milk production. Raspberry leaf, thought to tone the womb. And various plants used for pregnancy testing, because yes, even in a monastery of celibate men, there was interest in such knowledge. The monks copied medical texts that included information on women's medicine, preserving it even if they never practiced it themselves. One such monk, Brother Anselm is working in the garden on an autumn morning. The air is cool, crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and earth. He's harvesting seeds from the mugwort plants, carefully cutting the seed heads and placing them in a basket. These seeds will be stored for next year's planting, and some will be prepared as medicine. Mugwort was one of the most important herbs in medieval women's medicine. It was used to bring on delayed menstruation, to ease childbirth, to treat various ailments of the womb, and in some traditions it was also used as a pregnancy test. The belief was that a pregnant woman who drank a strong tea of mugwort would feel the baby move immediately, even in the early months before movement would normally be felt. A non-pregnant woman would feel nothing unusual, of course. What was probably happening in reality was that the mugwort tea caused digestive upset cramping, movement in the belly, and a woman hoping for pregnancy might interpret these sensations as the baby moving. But the belief persisted, written down in medical texts, passed along through generations. Brother Anselm, kneeling in the garden, his brown robes kilted up to keep them out of the dirt, works steadily. He finds peace in this work, in the connection to growing things, in the knowledge that these plants will help ease suffering. He may never marry, never father children, but through his garden and his healing work, he participates in the great cycle of life and death, growth and harvest. The sun climbs higher. Other monks are visible in the distance, working in the fields, tending the monastery's orchards. The rhythm of the monastic day continues. Around him the bells will ring for the next prayer service soon, but for now, there's just the garden, the plants, the quiet satisfaction of useful work. Let that scene settle over you like a blanket. The peaceful garden, the monk at his work, the plants growing in their rows. There's something deeply soothing about gardens, about the patient tending of growing things, about the cycle of seasons and planting and harvest. As you drift deeper into sleep, imagine yourself in such a garden, safe and peaceful, surrounded by green growing things and the good smell of earth. The herbal knowledge of pregnancy testing faded slowly over centuries. As medical practice became more professionalized, as male physicians claimed more authority over women's bodies, as old folk traditions were increasingly dismissed as superstition, these practices retreated to the margins, preserved mainly in rural areas. In the knowledge passed between women when men weren't listening, but traces of it persisted surprisingly late. In the 19th century, in remote rural areas of Europe, you could still find women who knew the old tests, who would prepare the teas and make the observations their grandmothers had taught them. The knowledge has never entirely disappeared. Even now, in some traditions of herbal medicine, you can find echoes of these old practices. Eleanor, in her garden in the 1420s, checking her plants as the summer afternoon wanes, represents a link in that long chain. She learned from her mother. She teaches the village women who come to her, and perhaps someday she'll have a daughter who will learn in turn. The garden will continue, the plants will grow. The knowledge will pass on as the light fades and evening comes. As Eleanor goes inside to prepare supper, as Brother Anselm returns to the monastery for vespers, as Marjorie walks home through the village, still feeling queasy but happy, let all these images blend together. Let them become a tapestry of green and growing things, of women's knowledge, of the eternal question that people have always asked: Is their new life beginning? Rest now in that tapestry. Let the garden surround you. Sleep comes like dusk falling, gradual and gentle, inevitable and sweet. We've come to our final chapter now, to the end of our wandering through medieval pregnancy tests. You're deeply relaxed, breathing slowly, thoughts drifting like leaves on a stream. Let me tell you one more story, one that takes us beyond the physical tests and into the realm of philosophy and faith, where medieval people grappled with the mystery not just of detecting pregnancy, but of understanding what it meant. When life began, when the soul entered the body. It's a winter evening. The year 1280 in Paris. Snow falls gently outside, muffling the usual city noise. In a small room near the university, a group of scholars has gathered: theologians, philosophers, a physician or two. They're debating a question that has occupied Christian thinkers for centuries. When does the soul enter the body? At conception, at quickening, at birth? This might seem like an abstract theological question, removed from the practical matter of pregnancy testing. But actually, it was deeply connected. Because if you didn't believe the fetus had a soul until several months into pregnancy, then the early months occupied a strange, ambiguous space. The woman wasn't quite pregnant, not in the fullest sense. Not until the soul arrived, the quickening, that moment when the mother first felt the baby move. Usually around the 4th or 5th month was considered by many medieval authorities to be the moment of ensoulment, the moment when the fetus became fully human. Before that, it was something else. Potential life, perhaps. A being in process of becoming, but not yet fully alive, not yet fully human. This belief had real consequences for how people thought about pregnancy and its detection. The early tests, the grain tests, the urine examinations. The key tests were in some sense testing for something ambiguous, something not quite pregnancy as we understand it. True pregnancy, in the medieval mind, began only at quickening. In the Paris room, the scholars argue. 1. A Dominican friar, with ink stains on his fingers, from years of copying manuscripts, cites Aristotle. The ancient philosopher taught that the soul developed in stages, with a vegetable soul first, then an animal soul, then finally the rational soul that made humans unique. This final soul, Aristotle argued, entered the male fetus at 40 days after conception, the female fetus at 90 days. Why the difference? Because Aristotle and the medieval scholars who followed him believed that male fetuses developed faster, were hotter, and more perfect, while female fetuses were slower, colder, less perfect. This was understood as simple biological fact, as obvious as the fact that the sun rises in the east. Another scholar, younger, challenges this interpretation. He points to Christian teaching, to the belief that God creates each individual soul and infuses it at a specific moment chosen by divine will. Perhaps, he suggests, ensoulment happens at conception, the very moment when the seed and the egg meet. When God's creative act begins, they argue back and forth as the candles burn lower and the snow accumulates on the windowsill outside. These aren't idle speculations to them. These are questions with real importance, questions that affect how priests counsel married couples, how physicians treat pregnant women, how society understands the beginning of life. Now, let me bring this back to the matter of pregnancy testing. There was one test that couldn't be performed by physicians or wise women, one test that required no herbs or keys or careful observation. This was the test of faith, of spiritual discernment, of prayer and divine revelation. Some medieval women, when they suspected pregnancy, would pray for guidance. For a sign from God, they might make a pilgrimage to a shrine known for helping with fertility and childbirth, presenting offerings and asking for confirmation. They might consult with a priest, seeking spiritual counsel, and some claimed to receive direct revelation, to know through divine communication that they were with child. This was especially common among holy women, mystics, those who claimed a special relationship with the divine. There are accounts of women who announced their pregnancies as divine revelation, saying that God or the Virgin Mary had appeared to them in a dream or vision and told them they were pregnant, or that their baby would be a boy, or that their child had a special destiny. Was this genuine religious experience, or rationalization, or self-deception? From our modern perspective, it's hard to say, but to medieval people, it was another form of knowledge, perhaps the highest form, more reliable than any physical test, because it came directly from the source of all truth. Let me tell you about one specific woman, a German mystic named Hildegard of Bingen, who lived in the 12th century. Hildegard was an abbess, a healer, a composer, a visionary, one of the most remarkable women of the Middle Ages. She never experienced pregnancy herself, being a nun, but she wrote about women's medicine with insight and compassion in her medical writings. Hildegard describes various pregnancy tests, including some we've discussed, examining urine, observing physical signs. But she also writes about something else, the spiritual dimension of pregnancy, the way a woman might know intuitively, through what Hildegard calls the greening power or viriditas that flows through all living things, that new life has begun within her. Hildegard believed that women had a special connection to the creative power of God, that their ability to bear life made them participants in divine creation. A woman who was attuned to her body, who was in harmony with the natural world and with God, might simply know that she was pregnant, know it in her soul before any physical sign appeared. Picture Hildegard in her monastery on a hillside above the Rhine River, surrounded by her sister nuns, tending her herb garden, writing her books, composing her songs. She's in her 50s now, a woman of authority and wisdom. Women come to her seeking advice on all sorts of matters, including pregnancy and childbirth. One Futch woman, a noblewoman from a nearby estate, sits with Hildegard in the monastery's guest chamber. The woman is troubled. She has taken the grain test, and it was negative. She has consulted with a physician who examined her urine and pronounced her not pregnant, but she feels, deep in her heart, that she is carrying a child. She can't explain it, can't justify it, but she knows. Hildegard listens quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her face calm. When the woman finishes, Hildegard is silent for a moment, then speaks. Tests, she says, are guides, not masters. Your body is your own. If you feel life stirring within you, if your soul tells you that God has blessed you with a child, then trust that knowledge. Time will reveal the truth. The woman leaves comforted, her anxiety eased. And weeks later, when her pregnancy becomes undeniable, when she feels the quickening and knows for certain, she remembers Hildegard's words and feels grateful for that validation, that permission to trust her own intuition. This, too, was a form of pregnancy testing, the testing of the soul against itself, the weighing of intuition against external evidence, the trust in internal knowledge. And perhaps it was, in its way, as reliable as any of the physical tests, given how unreliable those physical tests actually were as we near the end of our journey. As you float in that space between waking and sleeping, let me bring all these threads together. The grain tests and the urine examinations, the key tests and the pulse diagnoses, the herbal tests and the spiritual discernment. All of these were attempts to answer a question that has always mattered deeply to humans. Is there new life? Am I pregnant? What does the future hold? The tests were imperfect, sometimes absurd, occasionally harmful, but they represented something important: the human drive to know, to understand, to have some control over the great mysteries of existence. In a world where so much was uncertain, where death was common and life was fragile, where women risked everything in childbirth, the desire for early knowledge of pregnancy was powerful and profound. And underneath all the specific methods, all the different tests, was a deeper truth: that people cared, that they paid attention to their bodies, that they observed and theorized and tried to make sense of the subtle signs and signals that pregnancy produces. They were wrong about many things, but they were right about the fundamental reality that pregnancy changes the body in detectable ways, that there are patterns to be found, signals to be read. Modern pregnancy tests, with their hormone detection and their digital readouts, are vastly more accurate than anything medieval people had. But the question being asked is the same, and the emotions, hope, fear, anxiety, joy are the same. We're not so different from that young woman in a medieval village checking her sprouting seeds each day, or that noblewoman extending her wrist to the physician, or that mystic seeking divine guidance. As the snow continues to fall outside that Paris room, as the scholars finally conclude their debate and part ways into the winter night, as Hildegard returns to her prayers and her writing, as Eleanor sleeps in her manor house with her garden quiet and frozen outside, as all these fragments of the past settle into silence, let yourself settle too. You've journeyed far tonight, through centuries and across countries, through the strange and fascinating landscape of medieval medicine. You've seen how people struggled with the same questions we struggle with, how they sought answers with the tools they had, how they combined observation and theory and faith in their attempts to understand. And now, as we come to the end, as the last candle gutters out and darkness settles completely, let all these images fade. Let them blend together into a tapestry of history, rich and strange and human. Let yourself drift on that tapestry, supported by it, wrapped in the knowledge that you're part of the same great human story, connected to all the people who came before, who wondered and hoped and feared and sought answers. May these memories guide you into peaceful dreams. May the strangeness of the past lull you into deep rest. May you sleep well, knowing that the questions that kept medieval people awake are answered now, that the mysteries they struggled with are solved, that you live in a time of greater knowledge and greater certainty. And if you drifted off somewhere during this journey, if you're already deep in sleep and not hearing these words, that's perfect. That's exactly what this was for. Sweet dreams, wherever you are. Sweet dreams in your comfortable bed, in your safe home, in this moment of peace. If you're still awake, If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you for wandering through history with me tonight. Let me know in the comments if these stories helped you relax. If the strangeness of medieval pregnancy tests gave your mind something to focus on while your body eased into rest. Where are you listening from? What time is it there? I love knowing that these quiet histories are traveling around the world, helping people find peace. Until next time, friends, sleep well, rest deeply, and when you wake, may you carry with you a sense of connection to the past, a gentle reminder that we're all part of the same long human story, all asking the same essential questions, all seeking the same basic knowledge. Good night, sweet dreams, and may your sleep be as peaceful as a medieval garden at twilight, as quiet as a monastery at vespers, as gentle as snow falling on a winter evening 700 years ago. Sleep now, just sleep.